My belief does not make it reality. Your faith, no matter how intense it is worthless if it is not for the object of one's faith. I want to address several groups of people who are here tonight. We've got individuals who are professing Christians, but you're rethinking it. You maybe came to campus and you are in the faith of your father and mother, but wow, stuff happened and some Saturday nights took place and you got a little wobbly. Maybe you met a university professor who seemed really smart compared maybe to your youth pastor, and you got wobbled and you're shaky and you're rethinking it. I want to talk to you. I also want to talk to you if you are a rejecter of the Christian faith. You have said no to it all of your life, but maybe you're here tonight and you're rethinking it. I want to talk to you. And I want to talk to a third group of individuals, Christians who have deconstructed. It's all the rage these days, deconstruction. It is a part of a social contagion, frankly, and it all has to do with postmodernism. Do you know that that is the cultural air that you have been breathing? Whether you're aware of it or not, every Disney movie that you've ever watched, every social media video that talks about worldview has been feeding you secular humanism, specifically what I would call expressive postmodernism. That's what y'all are. You're expressive postmoderns. If you're not familiar with philosophical history, let me just take you on a very quick tour. Going back to the cross of Jesus Christ, whether you believe in him or not, he's the one who flipped the calendar from BC to AD. Jesus Christ, from his time, we're going to call it up until the 1400s. This became the age of reason. But in this time, this was the pre-modern era. And they simply believed whatever the authorities told them, specifically whatever God in the Bible said, that's enough, that settles it, I believe it. That was the pre-modern mindset. But about the 1400s, the empiricists, the age of reason came along to question the authority of God, and they determined who has the authority to determine reality, what is right, what is good, how we should live. The answer was, we do. We're moderns. And so with the scientific method, with logic and reason, we determine what is right. But there were competing views, and eventually the age of reason kind of ran out of gas, courtesy of World War I and II, because people realized, we're not really doing a very good job of running the place. It's not working out. I mean, everybody seems to be getting killed overseas. Maybe we don't have this figured out. And that is when something called postmodernism began. Postmodernism rejects that there's an empirical method. Postmodernism rejects that there is an authorial intent in the Bible from God himself. And they've determined that there is no truth except what the individual determines is true. So think of it like this. If philosophical history were a baseball game, if you were an umpire in the pre-modern era, you would call them as they are. If you're in the modern era, the age of reason, the pitch would come in and you'd call them as you see them. Now, today in postmodernism, if you're an umpire, you call them and that's what they actually become. That's the air that you currently breathe. Now, it's become slightly more sophisticated because starting way back in 1700, if you follow this chart, an individual named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he had this idea that what is most important about you is how you feel on the inside. And you've got shackles on you. You've got chains on you. And those chains came from your parents. Those chains came from the church. And they are keeping you down. And so he started thinking more and more about the importance of the individualized self. Well, a lot of people agreed. The Romantics, in response to the Age of Reason, these are the lake poets, Percy Shelley, Byron Keats, they wanted feelings more than science and reason. Where's the feelings? We want to feel stuff. And then the existentialists came along. The Camus, postmodernity was introduced courtesy of the French, like Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault. They started increasingly teaching that there is no truth but the truth of the individual. Truth isn't knowable. You had psychiatrists, all of them. Sigmund Freud said, the most important thing about you is your sexuality. And you got to just let that fly. You got to let that out. And you can't let society hold you down. Maslow, Jung, all said basically the same thing. And that is what is most important is what you're feeling on the inside. You got to let that out. And ain't nobody going to hold you down. And if they do, then those people are actually committing a crime. Maybe you've heard that language these days, that words are weapons. Well, how could a word be a weapon? Well, because if the preeminent belief is that what is inside of me is the most important thing about me, in fact, it's the most important thing on the planet. If you disagree with me, then you've committed a crime. You've wounded me, you're toxic, and I'm putting up boundaries. Well, you've got the transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the sexual revolution in the 60s, that came along and said, you got to let it go. Do it in the streets without any consequences. And along with the second wave of feminism, they wanted to separate the procreative act from the procreative consequence. In other words, you can go out and be frisky, and should you end up getting pregnant, we can take care of that via medication or an abortion, so that you can live your expressive self and enjoy yourself to the max. And that leads us ultimately now to your era. You're living in a time, the number one New York Times bestseller sold 7 million copies. It's called Let Them Theory. The idea is if anybody bugs you, if anybody disagrees with you, if anybody questions your decisions, those people, what are they doing? They're oppressing you, and you have got to let them go. That's what you've been drinking in. Disney's been singing about it. Social media has been celebrating it. I am certain that you have been getting that at this university from different professors. And they are questioning everything that you've ever believed because it's underneath the umbrella of you get to determine what is true, what is right. And with that has come a season of deconstruction. What postmodernism encourages, along with things like critical theory, is that whatever it is that you see out here, that's not the reality. So if you're reading a book, it's the meaning of the book isn't what's printed. The meaning of the book is what's between the lines. So we got to tear it down to figure out what the author was really thinking. It's deconstruction. So we're trying to deconstruct our government, our way of life. We're deconstructing language. We're deconstructing literature. And we're deconstructing Christianity. The Bible has a word for deconstruction, which is kind of a contemporary modern word. The biblical word for deconstruction is apostasy. These are people who once professed the faith, but then they walk away from it, demonstrating they never possessed the faith in the first place. And this is a trend. And so to all of the groups here tonight, and maybe even the fourth group, which would be Christians who are solid in your faith, if you know somebody who's deconstructing or rejecting Christianity, this will help you to understand what they're thinking and why so many are arriving at the decision, we've got to deconstruct Christianity. Here's my thesis. You're Don Quixote. Do you remember this piece of literature? Written, give or take, about 1605. Miguel de Cervantes wrote a story about a nobleman who was he just dug the idea of knighthood and chivalry. So he studied it and he went crazy. And he decided he was going to change his name and he was going to become a knight. And then he was going to head over the Spanish countryside to make right the things that are wrong. And he was going to be tilting with bad guys on the horse with a long stick tilter, whatever you call that thing, to knock them off their horse. And he hired a peasant. The name of the peasant, Sancho Panza, was hired just to assist him. And Sancho noticed that the guy that employed him is kind of crazy because he's seeing windmills and he thinks that they're bad guys. And so he tilts against windmills. You say, what does that have to do with deconstruction? This is my premise. If you've deconstructed, you're considering deconstructing, or you're rethinking, you've rejected Christianity, you've been tilting at windmills. You are Don Quixote. You are not deconstruction the actual. Here's how it typically works. When people are negative against Christianity, they identify something they don't like. And honestly, it might be something that we Christians don't like, but they'll identify the thing that they don't like and say, because that is bad, Christianity, therefore, is not true. It is not real. That's been the deconstructive process. But my plea with you tonight, I want to be your Sancho Panza and say, no, you're tilting against a windmill. That's not Christianity. You don't understand. You're not deconstructing the actual. You're merely deconstructing a complaint. All right, if you want to go back even further in literature, let's talk about Plato's allegory of the cave. Do you remember this story? You can kind of get it from the picture. The dude who's pointing, he's with a bunch of other people who have lived in a cave all their lives. They've never been out to see reality. They're shackled. And behind them is a low wall. And then there's people like the guy that you see holding up the dove. And the flame, which then, of course, causes whatever the individual is holding up that can project over the wall to project onto the wall that the captives see. And that is all they ever see for their entire lives. And so they conclude that's reality. The shadow is reality. Well, one of those guys breaks free, goes out, and he knows, whoa, we've been believing a shadow is reality. There's real people out there. There's real birds. And he comes in to try to persuade them, come to your senses and come out of the darkness into the light. I want to play that role with you tonight. I'm here to plead with you. Rethink Christianity, because my suspicion is, and you can determine if I've assessed the situation correctly, is you've deconstructed a shadow. You're tilting at a Christian windmill. Now, let me show you how I think this is played out perhaps in your mind or in the mind of somebody you know who's deconstructed Christianity. You know what a syllogism is? It's a way to make a statement, another statement, come to a conclusion. It's 3 parts. These are bad syllogisms, all right? A building has revolving doors, and I don't like revolving doors. The Empire State Building has revolving doors. Therefore, the Empire State Building doesn't exist. That's fallacious. That's drawing the wrong conclusion. I don't like cats. The internet is full of cat videos. Therefore, the internet is a hoax. How did I do in my reasoning? This is my suspicion. You've done this with Christianity. Here's another one. I get seasick. Australia, it's surrounded by an ocean. Therefore, Australia must be imaginary. I don't trust clowns. That's a good thing. Don't trust clowns. Never in mimes. Don't trust clowns in mimes. I don't trust clowns. The circus has clowns. Therefore, circuses are government propaganda. Are you seeing how these do not support themselves? Finally, this one. I'm afraid of heights. Airplanes go high. Therefore, flight was invented by those who want to control me. Do we agree those are bad syllogisms? Let's take a look at what I believe are some bad Christian syllogisms. These are the big reasons why I think so many people think they're deconstructing Christianity. They identify what they perceive to be a problem. They make it clear they don't like it. Christianity somehow is associated with it. Therefore, Christianity isn't true. So here's a big one. White men, typically European heterosexuals, they oppress people. Christianity has a lot of white men. Therefore, Christianity isn't true. Is that logical? It's not. But this is what people do. They claim that white men oppress people. If let's even say that that's true. And Christianity has a lot of white men. What does that have to do with the object of faith? If you have been deconstructing Christianity because you've seen an ill, you've seen a hypocrisy, you've seen something that you don't like, and you've torn it down, you haven't torn down the actual. Do not judge Jesus Christ based on some of the actions of some of his followers. It would be like me following you around, my atheist or agnostic friend, and I found out in grade school, you went to school with a kid who ended up being a terrorist. I don't like terrorists. You knew a terrorist. Now here's where it gets ridiculous. Then my conclusion would be, therefore you don't exist. That's illogical. But I think that's what a lot of people are doing with Christianity. Donald Trump is bad. Evangelicals vote for Trump. Therefore, Christianity is false. Is that syllogism logical? It's not, but I would present to you that that is precisely what people are doing. They don't like Donald Trump. He agitates them. And a bunch of evangelicals, for whatever reason, the majority of them voted for him. The conclusion then is fallacious. It has nothing to do with the veracity of the Christian faith, neither the object nor the testimony of the Christian faith. You might not like Donald Trump, but I can assure you he has very little to do with Jesus Christ. Don't judge Jesus based on actions of some of his followers that you don't like. If you do, you're deconstructing a shadow. Here's another one. Religion should be clean from politics. Evangelicals are very political. Therefore, that first century carpenter didn't exist. One thing has nothing to do with the other. Toxic parents are a drag. My evangelical parents were toxic. Therefore, the Bible is wrong. No, it's not. Maybe you had genuinely bad parents, but could I sneak this in? You probably didn't. Unless your parents were really abusive, physically, sexually, they were genuinely awful. Most parents are just doing their best. Don't divorce them. This is a big trend for your age group, the let them theory, because your parents probably don't affirm every decision you make. Am I right? They don't like what you're studying. They don't like what you're wearing. They don't like how you do your hair. Okay, I'm just telling you, overall, parents love their kids, and they're just trying to do what is best for you. And I would encourage you, don't fall into the expressive postmodern mindset that says, because they rub against me, they grate against me, I don't like them oppressing me, that you divorce them. Please don't do that to your mom and dad. All right, back to our syllogism. I like porn. I like fornication. I like free love. The Bible disagrees. Therefore, the Bible is false. Well, there's a lot of things that I don't like that our government does, but that doesn't make them false. The speed limit is 65 or it isn't. Now, I might not like it. I'd prefer 85. Well, I would. But it doesn't change reality because I don't like it. And that's what people do when it comes to sexuality. My truth is all that matters. My truth says Jesus didn't exist. Therefore, Jesus isn't real. Okay. I don't think this lady exists. She's still here. She's not going anywhere. My belief does not make it reality. Your faith, no matter how intense it is worthless if it is not for the object of one's faith. I can believe that this is God right here, and I believe it. I really, really believe it. And so I'm going to worship this bottle of water. I'm going to eat a doily. I'm going to put flowers around it because it's God, and I'm going to spend eternity drinking Fiji water for all of eternity. And you can go, well, okay, dude, you can think that that's true, but clearly it's not. My faith doesn't make it so. It is the object of the faith that matters. That's why you need to examine Jesus. You need to examine the Bible, which brings us to this one. Now, be careful on this one. This one's a little tricky. Mistakes render a book unreliable. I think that's true. I think the Bible has mistakes. Therefore, 2,000 years of faithful transmission of that book are invalid. Why would I say that's a bad syllogism when I actually agree with the premise? Because if the Bible claims to be the infallible, inspired, inerrant Word of God, but it's riddled with errors, well, then it contradicts itself. And it would then be a fallacious book. It would be an unreliable book. So why then have I categorized it as a bad syllogism? It's because of that middle line right there. I think the Bible has mistakes. The question is, does it? And to resolve that issue, it really is not a matter of intellect. It is a matter of will. I can assure you, every single contradiction that people think that they have found in the Bible, every single mistake that they believe that they've identified, have been addressed perhaps hundreds of times. There's libraries filled with books defending the Bible. And if you want to accept something reasonable, then you'll probably accept those explanations. If you don't want to believe the Bible, you're going to use this to deconstruct it. You're just going to, no, there's no explanation for that. It said it here, and then something over here. It didn't seem to be the same thing. Therefore, I'm flushing the whole thing. My encouragement to you is study the Bible with more of an open mind. Because our brains, when we want something, we're able to get them to affirm our decision. It's a matter of will. If you want the Bible to have mistakes, it'll have mistakes in your mind. But if you simply read these responses and these explanations reasonably, you're going to conclude the Bible doesn't have errors. Furthermore, the Bible is axiomatic. If I said to you, the President of the United States lives in the White House, and you said, I don't think that I believe you, pal, what would I do? I would take you to Washington, D.C. We'd go to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I'd walk you up to the windows of the White House, and there's the President right there. See? He lives in the White House. That's proving something axiomatically by looking inside of the claim. Here's what the Bible says. It's inspired. It is totally accurate, and it is sufficient for all of life and godliness. My encouragement to you is look inside of its pages, and what are you going to discover there? You are going to discover prophecies fulfilled. You're going to discover didactic profundity. You're going to read things like, whoa, that is like, whoa, better than Confucius or anything that I've ever read. This love your neighbor as yourself. This thing is profound. Furthermore, the Bible answers the big questions. What are we doing here? What's the point? Why are things the way that they are? The Bible explains why things are the way they are. Do you know why you communicate? We talk, we communicate. Do you know why? Because God communicates. Do you know why you're here to study, or at least you should be here to study? It's to become smart. Why? Because God is smart. Do you know why there are police and courtrooms and judges? It's because God is just, and he has a courtroom, and he has a penal system. And we are simply living in a mirrored reflection of a heavenly reality. Everything about our reality has a string attached to heaven. And when you read the Bible, you're going to conclude that and go, this is making sense of a lot. So if you're here tonight and you're looking for something to make sense of reality, it is my hope now to show you why you should say, this is the night. I'm changing my mind. I am going to submit to what the Bible proclaims. And here's what the Bible proclaims. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, the life. But there's even more to it than that. Here's why I think so many people reject Christianity. Here's why I think so many people who profess to be Christians deconstruct it. It's because they've never heard the true gospel. Evangelical community has really made a dog's breakfast out of the gospel. We've turned it into life enhancement. Hey, have you tried sex, drugs, rock and roll? Come to Jesus. He'll fill up your heart and he'll make your life better. That's not the gospel, because the promise of the Bible is that you will have trials, you will have temptation, you will have persecution. Now you get a lot of good stuff, but the Bible doesn't promise a thorn-free tiptoe through the rose bushes. It doesn't promise that. What it promises is, as you go through the trials of life, you will have a joy unspeakable because your soul is satisfied. The prosperity gospel, that's not the... Come to Jesus, you'll get rich. Give him money, he'll give you 10 times more money. That is just a lie. That is not the gospel. And maybe you've never heard the glorious gospel in its full technicolor presentation. And I'd like to give it to you very briefly, and then we're going to open this up for questions. And some of this you're going to go, yeah, I've heard this, pal. I've heard some of this, but I don't know that you've heard the exclamation point. I don't know that you've heard it. So here it is. The gospel is, first of all, judicial. Does that make sense to you if you're a Christian? The gospel is judicial. In other words, the gospel is about justice. The gospel is about having a standard of righteousness that must be adhered to. And if people fail to adhere to that standard, justice will be imposed. God is a God of righteousness. He's perfectly holy, righteous, just. Everything about him is what is good. And he has the standard of righteousness. And when you and I don't meet that standard, he then He then puts righteousness into action by imposing justice. And we like this, don't we? We like justice. You don't like thugs getting away with stuff, especially if they broke the windows in your car and took your stuff. What do you want? Justice. You see people treating people poorly. We see people whether they're racist or they're sexist or they're misogynistic or they're cruel or they're a tyrant or they truly do oppress people. What do you want? You want... They've earned justice. You want that. Do you know why you want that? Because that's what God wants. And guess what? God is going to have a day in court with everybody where the books are opened up. There will be no cold cases. There will be no unsolved mysteries because God is the one who sees. Will the one who made the eye not also see? Will the one who made the ear not also hear? God is meticulously keeping records of every unrighteous deed that has ever been committed, and he will make sure that the individual pays for what they have done because he's righteous. But God is rich in mercy. God is rich in mercy. He loves to show grace to people. He loves to forgive people. But do you feel the tension? If a judge really loved to forgive people, but he really should be sentencing them, you'd go, well, don't set the criminal free. That's not just. And by the way, that's what makes Islam a false system. Because even if the Quran indicates Allah on a good day might say to you, I'll let you into my paradise, what's the problem with that? Justice has not been satisfied. In other words, the criminal is being allowed into paradise and nobody's satisfied justice. Christianity satisfies justice. That's how God breaks the tension so that he can be just and the justifier of those who believe. He sent his son, the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, to take a body just like yours and mine. And he never dishonored his parents. Can you imagine that? Have you ever dishonored your parents? Can you imagine some kid never sass-mouthing mom and dad? Never lied, never shaded the truth like we all do. Never looked with lust. Are you kidding me? He was that pure? Yes, he was that pure. He fulfilled all righteousness. And then he went not as a victim, but as a volunteer to the cross. What was happening on the cross? I can't tell you how many Christians I meet. They'll have a necklace and I say, oh, dude, it's a cross. Tell me about it. I don't know, kind of jewelry and stuff. Well, the cross is everything because something transactional was taking place. God was seeing his beloved son, the diamond of heaven, as if he were you, the criminal, and he was pouring out his wrath on his beloved son. Why? So that justice could be satisfied. God saw Jesus as if he were you, and now he sees you as if you are Jesus, because here's the bonus of Christianity that most people aren't aware of. Jesus' death on the cross, it imputes you with righteousness. So in other words, not only are your sins forgiven, when you give Jesus Christ your rap sheet, he gives you his resume. You give him as your rap sheet, that criminal laundry list of yours, and he in exchange says, now take my resume. I always honored my mother and father. I always told the truth. I never lied. I never looked with lust. I didn't covet things. I never took God's name in vain. This is credited to you so that now when God looks upon you, he sees you as the citizen of the century because you're given the righteousness of Christ so that you are now commendable to God so that you can get to heaven. And you think, okay, well, that's pretty good. Hold on. Here's the exclamation point that a lot of people miss. What I just described for you is the doctrine of justification, that God will justify you because of the redemptive work of Jesus Christ. But there's an end to that. That is not the mountaintop of Christianity. Justification is awesome because it allows God to dismiss your court case, let you go free because Jesus paid your fine. But there was a teleology to it. There was a reason for it. And here's the reason. And this is what most people don't understand about Christianity. Jesus did that so your sins could be forgiven, so that you could be adopted. So that you could be brought into the family of God and welcomed into his kingdom. And when I say welcomed, I'm not saying that God is sitting in heaven going, man, I'm going to have to hold my nose. Let him in. Just let him in. No. God sent his son because he desires to have a relationship with the rebels. And he invites them to come in and to spend time with him and to commune with him and to know him and to learn from him and to be encouraged by him and to be loved by him. That's the king. What king is like that? I would ask you, what ruler even knows the names of the servants? What ruler actually cares about the individual citizens? The biblical answer is Jesus Christ. And years ago, we used to say that Christianity, it's not about a religion, it's about a relationship. We kind of lost that slogan, but that slogan is right. Christianity is more than moralisms. It has that, but it's more than that. It has a better way to live, but that's not the big deal. And yes, it is about forgiveness of sins. That's a much bigger deal. So that you can know God and God will know you. And you can be welcomed into his courtyard and spend eternity there. I would ask you, what kind of a king does that? The answer is Jesus Christ, the relational God, the loving God, the warm God, the tender God, the God who is generous and gracious and patient and compassionate, and he's loving. And he actually desires a relationship with the rebels. What kind of a king is this? It's King Jesus Christ. And I would ask you, what is not to love about a king like that? Do you know any other king who died for his servants? Do you know any king who has been so generous and has sacrificed his own luxury for the sake of those who hated him? What would you do for a king? If he won every battle he went out to fight, returned as a hero on a starlit night to a cheering crowd, would that make you proud? What would you do for a king? If he kept every promise that he'd ever made, would you take out a ticker tape, lead a parade, a society ball? Would you care at all? What would you do for a king who saw you out fishing down by the sea? And he came up to you and he said, "Follow me, it's time, you know." Do you think you'd go? And what would you do for a king if he took off his crown and he agreed to die? And as you tried to understand it, he looked you in the eye and he said, this is for you. What would you do? That is my question for you tonight. What will you do with King Jesus?
Fortis Institute seeks your best. It is our desire that you live a truly abundant life. In a world full of noise, we exist to provide timeless wisdom that helps people live with clarity, purpose, and joy. Our Fortis Institute Fellows represent some of today's most trusted Christian leaders: Dr. Jason Lyle, Dr. Greg Gifford, Dr. Adam Tyson, Dr. John Krotz, Dr. Andrew Walker, Brad Bigney, Tim Challies, Libby Glosson, and Todd Friel each have a heart to educate the Fortis Institute audience. Fortis Institute has produced over 3,000 national television programs, 10,000 hours of radio broadcasts, best-selling books, podcasts, forums, and training events, reaching millions worldwide. But here's what makes Fortis unique. Everything we create is yours for free. Podcasts to encourage you, resources to help you grow in knowledge, training that equips, and tools to help you find real peace and lasting joy. Visit fortisinstitute.org and get started for free.